Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, so we are the last session of this year's Social Computing Symposium. So happy that all of you guys are here, by the way. This is an event that I've enjoyed being at. I've been lucky to be here, I think, for the past like 9 years. And it's been so awesome every year and sort of like energizes me. And I think it's like full circle. Tom Coates, who's speaking on this session, was the person who invited me to the first one in 2008 or 2007. So anywho, we've been talking about different aspects of humans and technology today, in particular crowdsourcing and crowd workers. And this session is about the consequences of humanizing systems. So, you know, everyday technology can do, the notion is that everyday technology can do more for us so that we can spend more time on the things that we want to spend time on, or the things that matter the most. And I think one of the questions around the notion of humanizing technology or technological systems is, what does it take for us as users to give permission to these technologies, to listen, to think, to act on behalf of us, whether it's active or passive or hybrid. And designers are constantly kind of exploring ways to integrate human social cues and human behavior into the interfaces and interaction systems that we're using, both on hardware and software, to make it feel more natural. So that's, you know, this has led to things like, you know, talking plants like botanicals, or Tom's Talking House, which we'll probably hear about, House of Coats, or that time that 2 bots were talking on Twitter and the Bank of America butted in, or self-aware street signs, which we'll see in a little bit, or an autistic boy becoming BFFs with Siri. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities and challenges, and so hopefully we're going to get into some of the meat of that space today. So we'll cover, these are the 4 fantastic humans who are joining us today, and I'll get out of their way very shortly. I'll give their individual introductions as they come up to give their talks, but quickly, that's Julian Bleeker in the upper corner, Catherine Isbister, Tom Coates, and Darius Kazemi. And we'll cover things like sociality and chatbots and systems that are designed to be our slaves or assistants, and think about issues of intimacy and cognitive overhead and noise. So Catherine Isbister will talk a little bit about using emotion for designing interaction, with examples from her forthcoming book that spans games and wearables. Tom Coates is going to talk about objects that act like people, and personalities, and what that's all about. Darius is going to talk about his experience creating bots, and the Bot Summit. And Julian Bleeker is going to talk about this area in terms of design fiction. So imagining and representing humanized technology, not in product requirements or specifications, but as a thing on somebody's kitchen counter, or what an ad for that is, and really trying to get into the meat of what that experience is like. And then we're going to do breakouts. So we're going to hear from each person for about circa 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the human. And then maybe have a few questions, 1 question per person, I think. And then we'll do 40 minutes or so breakouts. And then we're going to come back here, and the breakout session leaders will give you a quick synopsis of what came out of those sessions. So just to give you a quick sense of why I care about some of this stuff, this is a recent project that I did with Jenny Rodenhouse, which is called Here, New York City, and it used 311 complaint data to procedurally generate cartoons with a personality or a perspective from a particular neighborhood in New York City. And behind that, you know, really is something called the Sentient data system or server. And the idea with this, who I worked on with Lars Leiden, who's in this room, the idea here was to challenge designers and developers to think of data in terms of relationships, personalities, and emotion. So really taking complex real-time or network data streams, process it through the Sentient data server, and have human readable output. And then I just thought I'd show you really quickly, this is a 2-minute video that I just wanted to show you some student projects that came out of it from a research and prototyping group that I ran at ITP. Sam Slover, who's here, he's a research assistant. One of his projects is in the class. I think it's the first one. So hopefully this little video will play. Let's see. Yeah. My audio is not on, which kind of sucks. Can you guys do anything about that? Dang. My PC audio. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's not going to work. All right, well, the first thing that you saw was a self-aware street sign that was using like a human face and positive feedback to talk to. Let me pause this and just tell you what these projects are, or not. Here, we'll just skip ahead. So this was a self-aware street sign where it's telling you to stop jaywalking. So they were looking at what's happening locally on the street and then giving real-time feedback to passersby to help connect them to their environment. And then there was a little button you could press for positive feedback as well. But it brings up issues of pedestrian permissions, privacy issues, and kind of meaningful social etiquette. So the video that you're not seeing is actually all very positive experiences. And these slides after, I'm just going to kind of call out some of the challenges that emerge from those interaction systems. This was a dynamic map that would kind of hide or expand the size of neighborhoods in New York City based on 311 complaint data, and that was meant to express shame or pride. And that brings up issues of like who defines shame and what is shame, and 311 data as a data set. Does everybody in this room know what that is, 311? Okay, it's subjective. So it's not like ground truth. So there's that. And then oversimplification and more privacy concerns. This was a system that used emotion as a way to abstract a user's state to tell third-party services when and where on the social stack to reach them. So it might say that you're feeling down or something based on your calendar data, your Fitbit data, and your location information as a way to tell a third-party service where, when, and how to reach a user, like via text message or email or phone call or what have you. But it brings up issues of like, how do you debug a system like that, and what does it mean to silence systems without a user's knowledge? And this was from a reactive room that was looking at noise levels and human presence in a room, and based on, it was meant to encourage collaboration. So when there were a certain number of people, a threshold that was reached, and individuals were being too loud, the room itself would shush, would introduce white noise to kind of like quiet down the space. It also had screens to kind of like encourage dynamic participation. But that brings up issues of data management of audio and this constant shushing and agitating and who sets the permissions for the room. And this last one, which is a shame you're not seeing, these were self-aware bikes that were networked to the city bike system in New York City. And they used a tail mechanism to express their kind of emotional state. And they were optimized to get you to move the bikes to the different hubs in the city that were missing bikes. But it might be the second time you're using them or the first time you're using them. So their tails might wag to express happiness or alarm or that sort of thing. And they played music based on their emotional state and would sync up when they were next to people. But it brings up the issue of complexity and overload and noise, and again, what's the social etiquette? So there's a bunch of these projects that are being explored by students. This is a project coming out of Microsoft right now that I'm headed to China to check out tomorrow, called Xiaoice. This is a chatbot that's strangely incredibly popular right now in China. And it does things like count sheep with you to help you go to sleep. Just like says 1 sheep, and you say 2, and then it says 3. Or it'll identify species of dogs based on pictures, and people have been interviewing it. So with that said, just so you have a sense of where I'm coming from with this, I'd like to welcome Catherine Isbister, who's going to be our first speaker. And Catherine is an associate professor jointly appointed between New York University's Engineering Computer Science program and NYU's Game Center and Tisch School of the Arts. She's the director of the Game Innovation Lab, where her team creates research games with support from the NSF and Microsoft and Bell Labs and other funders. Her projects have been featured in Wired and Scientific American and on NPR as well. And she's an early recipient of the MIT Technology Review Young Innovators Award and is a Humboldt Experienced Research Fellow. She's currently on sabbatical as a fellow at Stanford's CABS Center. Catherine.
Okay, So I'm going to talk about playful relations with machines. And as Katie mentioned, I direct this Game Innovation Lab. And I'll give you some pictures of that. So this is a place that's housed in Brooklyn at the NYU School of Engineering. And the purpose of the place is really focusing on the engineering and computer science side of game development, but with an eye toward partnering with all the amazing people at NYU, such as those at the NYU Game Center, where I'm jointly appointed, looking at essentially where technology and experience get together in games. But when Katie contacted me about this panel, I was super excited because it took me sort of back in the Wayback Machine to what I was doing before I was working with games. Some of you may recognize HyperCard. This is a really old interactive prototyping tool. So I actually did my PhD thesis on humanizing technology, and I worked with a guy named Cliff Nass, who some of you might remember his name. He and his colleague Byron Reeves wrote a book called The Media Equation, which was basically, they did a series of studies that showed that people would treat technology as if it was human in very amusing ways sometimes, simply by virtue of the computer acting as if it was human. So a classic example is if a computer did a favor for you, basically helped you out during the course of a training you were going through, after you went through the training, if you were asked by that computer to do a favor for it, which was basically color correcting a series of colors because it was trying to fix its monitor, you would help that computer much more than you would help a second computer who asked you to do a favor while you were evaluating. So just really silly stuff. So, so my thesis was actually about body language. So it wasn't about verbal communication, it was about nonverbal communication. And you had to do this desert survival task with this character where you chose which things that you fell out of an airplane into the desert and you're trying to survive. Which things should you rank the highest? So it turns out if a character is sending you inconsistent nonverbal cues about itself, about its personality, you distrust its advice, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it with something as poor as this, but nonetheless, which is true. So I was super excited about all this, and I went off to go do a postdoc in Japan, doing some more work on this, and then this thing happened. Which people who are older in the room probably remember. The Microsoft Office had this paperclip, and the paperclip is long gone. But my advisor had actually worked on this project, and the idea was there would be this helpful agent who would come in and assist you in doing things, and it turned out people really, really hated it and mocked it and made fun of it, and it became this thing. And so every time I would tell anybody about my research and what I was doing, they would say, "Oh God, you mean like that paperclip?" And I thought, wow, my career is over before it's even started. You know, how am I going to work on intelligent interfaces when no one wants to actually see them or deal with them? So there I was in Japan, kind of mulling this over. And meanwhile, my boyfriend bought me this PlayStation console because I had seen this game that I really wanted to play. So has anybody ever played Parappa the Rapper? A few people, okay. This was actually the very first rhythm game. It's totally fun and it's really, really easy. So if you are not a good Twitch gamer, you can still play this game. Anyway, so you're basically this earnest little dog and you're trying to like succeed in life and get the girl and whatever. And so you have to do all these tasks, and the way you do them is you play this rhythm game. And I was completely charmed by this game, and as I was playing it, I suddenly realized, wait a minute, video games have characters all over them, and people love it. So obviously, there's something problematic in the way that we're tackling, these characters in the workspace. I don't think I need to abandon this work. I should figure out what's going on in video games and why characters and anthropomorphizing is acceptable in this domain. And I realized that actually, if you go back historically, games have always had little creatures, little characters in them since the beginning days. And when I was young, I used to play Centipede, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, oh, well, partly why I like Centipede is because I felt okay about killing bugs, which, if you're Buddhist, you would disagree with me on that one. But as a kid, I wasn't comfortable killing other things in a video game, but I was okay with killing these kinds of characters. So I thought, all right, obviously there's something to this. This is a consistent part of video games, and I'm going to figure out what games are doing well so I can resurrect my research area. And I literally spent several years working on this, and I taught a class at Stanford for a while on game character design, and it resulted in a book about what game developers were doing really well in terms of game character design. And since I had been trained in a social science department, most of the lens through which I was looking at it and understanding it was that the best game characters were very artfully using things about how people read nonverbal signals, about how people size up one another, about how we do social dances with each other through things like social roles. And I basically put that information into a book, mostly actually for active practitioners. So there's too much material in that book to actually convey to you all in this talk. I wanted to share a couple of things, high-level insights that I had, because I see that this space is sort of heating up again. One of the things I realized about the failure of the paperclip to excite people was that at that time, and I think this has changed now, computers were primarily work machines that were situated in work, and there were laptops and such, but everyone expected the computer to be a very quiet, focused space for themselves. They were not used to receiving resistance and socialization from the computer. So that in and of itself was completely disturbing. Whereas firing up a video game, from the beginning you would expect, oh, okay, surprising things could happen, this will be social, it will be interesting. This is actually a picture of my daughter and her friends who made up a game with a hula hoop of just running around all together and falling down in the hula hoop. So just to sort of, represent the chaos that one expects in video games. So part of it was just context. Another part of it was context in a different sense, which is that what I realized in thinking about Parappa versus this Clippy on the desktop was the desktop metaphor gives you very little information for poor Clippy to use about what a person's goals are, what their intentions are, and what's happening next for them, and kind of the heroic arc of their daily experience with their computer. Whereas video games are conceived from the beginning as these whole spaces with a narrative arc, and the designer is controlling everything about the experience. So it's really easy for the designer to know that, oh, wow, I'm trying to get my driver's license in the game, I'm very excited about it, and to give me emotional payoff with really interesting, funny things that the character does to me. Whereas Clippy was sort of reduced to saying, hey, it looks like you're trying to write a letter, because that's about the only thing that he could guess about you. So it's no great surprise that it was pretty frustrating. Probably, if Clippy could be frustrated, he would have been profoundly frustrated probably by that. And I was thinking about that mansplaining talk and thinking that Clippy kind of was doing mansplaining in a funny way when he would say, looks like you're trying to write a letter, because of course you were trying to write a letter. It was very annoying. Anyway, so I guess what I'm trying to say is I realized games know the goals you're working toward. They drive you toward the goals you're working toward, and a lot of human emotion and connection actually comes out of working toward goals. So knowing about that makes a big difference in creating a really compelling experience with a technology that's trying to relate to you in a human and social way. So when I was doing this project, I also did some massive surveys of people, gamers and game developers about, what have been emotional moments for you in gaming? What have been times where you felt really profoundly, have you ever cried? There's this whole sort of trope, did you ever, can a game make you cry that Electronic Arts had ads about years ago? And funny enough, one of the games that came up again and again was actually a text-based adventure called Planetfall. Has anybody here played it? It's a pretty old game. Oh, okay, a few people have. So anyway, it's a very funny game. And you have this very silly robot named Floyd that you meet up with in the game, and who persists and goes along with you to accomplish these missions. And then, this is a spoiler, so close your ears if you think you're going to go play this game. But at a certain point, Floyd basically sacrifices himself for you. He realizes that in order to get to the final stage of the game, you're going to have to get something, and so he just sort of throws himself into the task. And when he sacrifices himself, your character singing the song to him, and it's very poignant, and apparently that's just made people burst into tears. And I think part of it was the character's personality, but also the sheer persistence of activity in the game. I've been playing this game for hours. I've been hanging out essentially with this character for hours, and now he's done something that's deeply meaningful for me in the game, and it's a genuine loss. I know I'm not going to get him back. And that was true of other emotional moments that people shared with video games. So that's kind of an amazing thing to do with a game that is only text-based and only lasts for a few hours. Okay, so flashing forward a few years. Right now, as Katie said, I'm on sabbatical at Stanford, and I've been working on this book. One of the things I'm working on is a book for MIT Press, which is essentially trying to take some of the things that so my first book was for game developers. This book is actually for the general public to help people understand what is it that games are doing to affect people emotionally that are actually very, very profound design moves that have been made that are shaping where media technology can go. And I think this notion of forging a relationship over time that has little emotional nuances and ticks in it is a very deep one. So has anybody seen Japanese dating sims? A couple of people, not so many people. Okay, so this is a genre of game that's mostly popular in Japan, and some of them are erotic and pornographic, but actually not all of them are. Some of them are really sweet, and this is an example of that sort of genre. And basically what you do is you spend days and days in this game. Well, first there are 3 or 4 different people, usually women, that you're picking to decide to court because you would like to go out with them. And then you spend 100 days in the game making little moves, like offering to carry their books, like getting to know their brother, like, learning about their hobbies, and also building up your skills and abilities. And then at a certain point, you may be lucky enough that one of these characters, and you have to pick one to really focus on, decides that they want to go out with you. And then after that, you're actually going on dates, and you're sort of getting to know them, and you're getting to know their intimate little habits and funny routines and so on and so forth. It's a really sweet kind of interaction to have with a fictional character. I mean, in some sense, it reminds me of people reading romance novels, but in the case of these dating sims, you're actually interacting and forging this strong connection with this character through your own actions and literally hanging out together. So there was actually a guy from Japan that staged a wedding to his character in Guam. This was in 2009, and I don't think that he, really, thinks it's a real marriage, but it sort of highlighted the fact that people really enjoy these relationships, and some of the players who talk about these games say that it feels better to play a dating sim than to actually try to date women, because in the dating sim, I know if I follow the rules and if I do things properly, eventually I'm going to be rewarded. And for somebody who's having trouble mastering those social skills, that could actually be an enjoyable way to practice, and also could potentially become a kind of disturbing safe space to be in, right? So have you seen this movie, Her? Yes, right? So we keep revisiting the same theme. I mean, Blade Runner is an older version of this. And for me, I think that cultivating pseudo relationships with things can be really compelling when it gets someone to ruminate on themselves and how they relate to others, and maybe be moved by that to engage with other people. I think it can also be kind of a disturbing wandering off into the weeds, so to speak, and I think that's true of any powerful mediated experience. So personally, I took a turn after diving so deeply into these pseudo-social relationships toward thinking about, well, how could I use characters and such to advance relationships between people, so not making them the center of attention. I did a really strange project when I was at that lab in Japan, where I had a character intermediate conversation between people. And what it would do was in this strange little online environment, and when there was a silence, it would come up and offer a topic of conversation. So I made 2 versions. One version would offer really safe topics to talk about, but the other version would intentionally offer very provocative topics. So this was meant to help conversations between English and Japanese speaking students, and they were, Japanese students were learning English. So some of the topics would be things like, is it okay to fish for and kill whales? Which people felt very differently in both cultures. So it turns out that when the character would say something really awkward like that, people loved it. They loved scapegoating and blaming the character, and they felt much closer to each other. And so they were essentially using the character as a vehicle through which to become closer to each other. And I thought, I really like that. I think it's good to make the character, it's good to make the technology really serve human relationships. So in the last few years, I've been building games mostly in the physical world, so not entirely digital world, and trying to enhance human relationship through the way that the technology intervenes, basically making them sensitive to social signals. So I'm going to tell you about two of them very briefly. One is called Yamove, and it's a dance battle game that uses mobile phones. And I got a little funding for it from Elizabeth when she was back at Yahoo, which was super. So this game is basically working with the fact that movement builds connection. And at least in the US, we sometimes use that fact by having people do dances at weddings and such to build community between folks. So what we did was we took b-boy dance battles as a metaphor. And I don't know if people have seen these before. Probably not many people have been to one live. But what happens is there's a group of people in a circle, and then dancers get up and they dance. Sometimes they're teams of dancers. Sometimes it's individuals. And they do these crazy dance moves. And then there's some judging that goes on. It's all pretty, secret and kind of informal. It's not always clear, what the criteria are. But anyway, somebody wins the dance battle. So we basically took this metaphor, and we took mobile phones and we strapped them to people's wrists, and we created partner dance battles. So you and your partner would dance in sync against another pair that was dancing in sync. And so the computer is basically the arbiter of being in sync. So it's just trying to create human connection between the players as they focus on one another while they're dancing. Has anybody played Dance Central, anything like that? Okay, a lot of people. So normally when you play dance games on the computer, you're staring at the screen because you're copying the moves of dancers on the screen. With this game, the attention is on the other dancer. And the whole point is to build connection between the dancers. So let me show you a little video of the game. So this was at Indiecade, which is the big independent game festival. And basically, people can make up any move they wanted. So, two teams dancing against each other. Each team could make up any set of moves they wanted during each round. And what would happen is people would have to pay really close attention to each other, decide what move they could do well. Usually, quickly, one or the other person would start to lead, and they'd kind of figure out who was comfortable leading, and have a really great time with improvising. And since the algorithm was just looking for synchrony and mixing it up and keeping the pace up, you could have very different levels of dance ability going on between the two teams and between the two dancers, and you could still have interesting results. So we had everything from people who are expert dancers wandering through to like soccer moms and their kids, and everyone had a really good time with it. And unlike playing something like Dance Central, where everyone typically is staring at the screen, both the players and the spectators, because there's so much going on and you're trying to follow it, with this game, people are all looking at the dancers. So this is one example of using a sensing technology to track on something that can change a social dynamic that benefits relationship. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so super brief on the other project. This one is a collaboration with an artist who's artist in residence in my lab. And she was really interested in how people take on alternate personas within video games and whether we could take that out of the screen and into interaction. So she was really inspired by things like Kamen Riders, which are these 70s TV characters that would transform through strange gestures and become superheroes. And she wanted to see if she could create a game in which she would have wearable elements and have to collaborate with someone and transform yourself through this collaboration. So she sketched up some ideas, and she created these wearables that you can put on. And this is the gauntlet, and then there's also a backpack. And so essentially the way you play the game is the person with the backpack has to collect energy by doing movements, and then hold hands with the person who is wearing the gauntlet, who then aims the gauntlet to fire at things. So it's a deeply collaborative game. And I'll just show you briefly a little video of this. So we were play testing this at iBeam, which is a gallery in New York. And a bunch of people brought their kids, which was kind of funny. So it wasn't intended to be a kids game, but they sort of took over. And you can see when you rub your hands together, the backpack fills up, and then they run over and hold hands. So one of the kids there was my daughter, actually. And when she was playing the game and holding the hand of this boy who she was playing with, apparently some kind of transformation happened to her, because as we were walking home after the playtest, she said, Mommy, I kind of think that boy is cute. And I was like, because she was like 7 years old, and I'm like, oh my God, and I sort of realized it was this, the physical act of holding hands actually changed how she felt, maybe even for the first time in her life. So, I mean, on a certain level, it's disturbing as a parent, but it's also really powerful. And it has to do with that just taking technology and using it to empower that relationship instead of making everyone stare at the screen. So I guess I would conclude by saying I've sort of moved from trying to create technologies that draw a lot of attention to themselves and provoke a pseudo-human relation with you to making technologies that artfully humanize relations between people. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.